Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Vito Corleone, and today we are going to talk about my essay on God that I wrote. It's called Proof of God number 2, Ontological a priori mathematical evidence as the argument from contingency based on consciousness. And so before I get into that, I wanted to say a couple of things. So the first thing I wanted to say is that I'm not really trying to convert anyone to any kind of religion. I just really am looking for feedback on the argument that I have presented here today on this whiteboard, as well as my essay. If anyone wants to read it, it's only 6 pages long right now. And so if you want that, you can contact me. I will put my email in the description below, just in case you want to contact me to read the essay that I wrote, because it's, in my opinion, honestly, they're good. But you'll find out as we go through it and deal with the argument, because essentially what I'm going to talk about today is the proof of God. And this will be discussed from an intellectual perspective and a perspective that will also reach the common person. So as you noticed, I already said ontological a priori. It's not, too big of a deal if you're not familiar with what these words mean. They will become apparent throughout the essay and the paper. But ontology is the study of the nature of being. Being are things. We're studying what things are, the nature of what they are. And a priori is a type of knowledge. So basically what that means, if you really, it's a French word, but if you want to think about it, how similar it is to a prior thing. So basically it's something that we know, pretty much kind of are born with this knowledge. The best way to put it is fish swim. We know that if it is a fish, it swims. It's a priori knowledge. It's something that we know based on simply having understanding of what the thing is. We know that there are other characteristics or other aspects of knowledge that come with it, a priori. That's a very simple definition. So just like I said, I will explain things as I go. And so the consequences of the acceptance of this argument will be explained in another video, as well as this argument is not about theology. This is specifically about metaphysics. And so basically what that means is metaphysics is about determining whether or not God exists, and theology is about defining what quality of God there are. For example, here in the West, we're familiar with Jesus Christ being certain qualities of God. God is manifested in its Son, Jesus Christ. I and my Father are one. And then also we have another kind of theology, Islam. This is God the most gracious, the most merciful, the most loving. And so there are different types of theology, but again, whether or not we're dealing with one type of God or another type of God is for a different video. What we're dealing with is whether or not we can accept God or whether or not we should just go with atheism. And so let's hop right in. So I will be reading verbatim from the essay because of two reasons. One, I want to get feedback on this essay, and I know if I put it in video format, it will allow me to reach more people than just being in written form. The second reason is that I need to use specific language in how I approach this situation, and the only way to use that specific language is either to have a teleprompter or, since I don't have that, it's to read off the essay that I have before me. And so we are actually going to begin with the essay. If you do ever happen to read it, it starts out with explaining what proof of God number 1 is, as this is proof of God number 2. But I I haven't taken the time to write out an essay for proof of God number one yet. It was actually the first thing I did, but because of how complicated the process was, it ended up with me taking a break from it and moving on to Proof of God number 2, because in 6 pages it's pretty easy to explain why it's Proof of God. So let's begin. So again, I just want to formulate my ideas. I'm not really interested in trying to convert anyone, but if you do think that it is legitimate proof of God, please share this video to those people who you think will accept what it has to say, or just provide any kind of feedback. Because like I said, this is about choosing atheism versus theism in a unbiased fashion. So any perspectives, I'd love to hear them. So let's begin. For Proof of God number 2, we'll be talking about Plato's Timaeus, already mentioned over here, and Proclus's Elements of Theology. I wrote out a couple of the propositions that we're dealing with. This will not be an explanation of what they have to say. This will be an explanation of some of the things that they say in the way that I need to present it to correspond to this argument up here. And so to begin, philosophy always clarifies. However, I'm not going to do too much clarification in these 3 regards. So the first thing I need to clarify is that knowledge can be discovered and truth can be known. There are certain philosophies out there that say that knowledge cannot be discovered and truth cannot be known. We're just, like I said, I'm not going to clarify this. This is an argument for another time. I'm just clarifying that this is the fundamental presuppositions that we're working from, although they're only presupposed because I can't explain them in this video. Otherwise, it would be a video on epistemology, and it wouldn't be a video on ontology. So, the second thing is that logic is based in reality, and our form of logic must necessarily conform to external reality primarily and internal reality secondarily. So what this really means is that, like I said, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but essentially your own thoughts are part of reality, and so when we're considering certain aspects of being, we're considering those secondarily in terms of being to external reality. Just for this video, right? Like I said, I'm not going to get into it right now. This is just the fundamental foundation of philosophy in which we're working from. Knowledge can be known, truth can be discovered, logic is based in reality, and finally, this monograph is about metaphysics, and the metaphysics will be explained throughout the video. So ontology is just another way of talking about studying of being. Metaphysics is also just the study of being. However, metaphysics usually connotates metaphysical beings, such as spiritual things. Although, again, that is a simplistic definition. I won't be doing my best to just give simple definitions for the person who is the layman in terms of philosophy. If you understand that it's a simple definition, then you don't need a definition. You already understand what I'm talking about. Alright, so the proof is displayed in this equation here, and so it's very important that we have this equation in mind the entire time. Honestly, just the whole dialogue, whole diagram, but specifically this equation. So number 1, dead matter plus dead matter equals dead matter. Number 2, dead matter plus consciousness equals conscious matter. And number 3, consciousness plus consciousness equals conscious matter. So the first one, dead matter plus dead matter equals dead matter, that's atheism. The second one, dead matter plus consciousness equals conscious matter, that's theistic dualism. And consciousness plus consciousness equals conscious matter, that would be pantheism. So this would be my version of the argument from contingency. For those who aren't aware, the argument for God from contingency states that beings are contingent upon each other as plants produce seeds that turn into more plants. So what this means is that for essentially a thing is contingent, right? So plants give produce seeds that produce more plants, right? So plants are contingent upon each other, and we know that the same thing in terms of humans. Human gives birth to more humans. Humans are contingent, right? So beings are contingent. We understand this as a part of nature and a part of reality, and so we understand that there also cannot be an infinite cycle. There must be at some point a starting cause to create this cycle. And so this cause is called the necessary cause. And so if you've heard of the argument of contingency before, this is where I start getting to what I have to say about it. So this necessary first being is going to be called the first cause, the unmoved mover, and it's going to be called the monad, and this is necessarily God. And we must be extremely specific with our usage of the term God, and it very specifically means consciousness. Consciousness and God right here, I describe the attributes, consciousness, and we'll go into these other attributes later, but right now we just want to note that God is consciousness. Okay, so why is it consciousness? So the difference between every atheist and every theist is that the atheist doesn't think a conscious being was responsible for the universe, whereas all theists think a conscious being was responsible for the universe. Whether they be pantheist, dualist, polytheist, monotheist, or deist, all theists think that conscious beings were responsible for the universe. Accordingly, the argument for God from contingency must have a narrow focus on consciousness itself, and if it doesn't include this narrow focus, it is a failed argument. And most atheists understand this. Why is it that we must talk about consciousness being the most important part of the argument from contingency? Well, let's walk through a couple of things in Plato's Timaeus and 3 of the propositions of Proclus's Elements of Theology, although there are 4 up here. Plato's Timaeus is quite complex, so we're only going to talk about Plato's focus and a few key points. In the dialogue, for those who have read the Timaeus, Plato may seem to be concerned with the cause of the universe, but that is not really the case. Surprisingly, Plato has a much deeper insight and chooses to focus on the conditions necessary to bring our universe into existence. To focus on the cause of something is very different than to focus on the conditions in which there must be for this cause to exist. A perfect example would be that focusing on the cause of the start of a fire when someone lights a match will be different than focusing on the conditions needed for a fire to exist in the first place. The conditions needed are a proper source of oxygen, dry kindling, etc. Therefore, in the Timaeus and in this argument, we are fundamentally studying the conditions which are needed for our specific universe to come into existence with conscious beings. So again, we're not focused on hypotheticals, we're focused on our specific universe and dealing with how conscious beings came into existence. And so now let's briefly go over these diagrams. So there's diagram A, B, C. A is the universe, B is fire, C is pretty much anything else, but up here I wrote chicken and plants. The example that I just gave is that focusing on the conditions, oxygen, dry kindling, and wind protection are different than focusing on the cause of a fire. So the match lighting the dry kindling to start the fire, which with all the conditions, protection from the wind and the elements, as well as a appropriate source of oxygen, allows this cause and effect relationship to happen, right? So that's the important perspective that we have to have when also considering diagram A, how consciousness came into the universe, or how consciousness interplays with the universe. Accordingly, the goal of Plato's Timaeus is to present a metaphysics that rests on a set of conditions that will allow this specific universe to come into being solely deduced through dialectical reasoning, which basically just means conversation. Just by having a conversation about what we already know, a priori, things that we already know, then we can come to the truth. This set of metaphysical principles will explain how we are able to be conscious of this universe, as well as something much more unique than that, being conscious of ourselves through self-reflection. Not only can we think, but we can think about ourselves thinking about ourselves. This action is called self-reflection, and in Greek it is called ousia, O-U-S-I-A. So the only proof that I need for this argument for God is that you are a conscious being, I'm a conscious being, there are conscious beings out there, right? That is the only proof that I'm working with in this a priori argument. We are made of matter. This is a fact. We are conscious. This is a fact. We gather that you and I are conscious matter from these two facts. So for us to have a tenable worldview when choosing whether or not we should be atheists or theists, we must hold this front and center. That is because you and I are matter that is intelligent. We can do incredible and amazing things with our intelligence. At the same time, we are also stupid. Matter can be smart and matter can be stupid. You and I are matter that feels. We feel love. We feel hate, curiosity, and so much more than this. We must have a metaphysics in which there is matter that feels curious, that feels hate, that is smart and stupid. Matter. Look around you, right? All different types of matter. We have matter that is smart. All right, so any kind of metaphysics that we have, it's got to include the fact that we have matter that can feel curious. Think about how interesting of a phenomenon curiosity is. Isn't it quite curious? So the reason I keep saying it like this is because the atheistic worldview claims that there is no consciousness outside of the biological organism. All else is dead matter. However, the atheist has yet to explain how an intelligent, feeling creature with the ability to perform self-reflection can exist in a universe of dead matter. The three mathematical equations presented leave only two possibilities for consciousness to exist in our universe. As Plato says in the Timaeus, the basic primordial patterns of all that is life must include intelligence, which in Greek is nous, feeling, and self-reflection, which in Greek is ousia, intrinsic to the essence of the conditions in which produced it. To explain why the mathematical ontological a priori equation only leaves us with options number 2 and 3, which only leave us with theism. It cuts out atheism because it doesn't. Dead matter plus dead matter doesn't equal consciousness, and don't worry if you didn't accept that. We're going to explain why. So, to explain why, that brings us to Proclus's Elements of Theology. So there are 211 propositions in the entire work, starting with proposition number 1. All multitude participates in a certain respect with the one. And then moves down a list of propositions, all based on the elements needed for our specific cosmos to come into existence. We will be focusing solely on proposition number 28, number 30, and number 103. So proposition number 28 says that every producing cause gives subsistence to things similar to itself. Okay? Proposition number 30 says everything that is produced from a certain thing without a medium abides in its producing cause and proceeds from it. Okay? Proposition number 103, everything the effect contains must necessarily be found within the cause that produced it. Now don't worry if you didn't understand that and how it relates. I'm going to explain it. So dead matter cannot produce consciousness, and we know this a priori by defining it as dead matter. Dead matter cannot produce conscious, intelligent, feeling, thoughtful, self-reflective matter because that very worldview denies the intrinsic properties needed for the conditions to create the universe that we live in today. That atheistic claim that dead matter can produce consciousness is analogous to saying that a chicken can produce a cow. That a chicken, something very small, can produce something very large. Claiming that matter that doesn't have any of the intrinsic properties of consciousness can produce a feeling, curious, intelligent, and self-reflective matter violates the law of non-contradiction and is analogous to saying a chicken can produce a cow. The chicken does not have the intrinsic properties needed to set the conditions necessary to bring a cow into existence, obviously. And the same way, a universe of dead matter does not have the intrinsic properties capable of producing the conditions necessary to bring conscious, intelligent, feeling, and self-reflective matter into existence. In the words of Proclus, if the product of a producing cause is something entirely dissimilar, then there will be no point of contact between the cause and the effect because they are entirely dissimilar. Because every producing cause gives subsistence to things similar to itself. Dead matter cannot produce conscious matter unless the effect is similar to its cause. Okay, so right here we have three different diagrams. Diagram A, diagram B, diagram C. We set up cause-effect relationships. This C and E means cause-effect. Cause-effect, cause-effect. This COND, if you can read it, says condition number 1, condition number 2, condition number 3. And then we have matching condition 1, 2, 3, condition 1, 2, 3, cause-effect, 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 cause-effect. All right, so in these cause-effect relationships, what we need to necessarily understand is what is happening in the process to allow these cause and effect relationships to exist. And so what I just wrote is that every producing cause gives subsistence to things similar to itself. All right, so let's just take the easiest example, right? Chicken. Chicken, egg, right? Chickens produce eggs, eggs turn into chickens, chickens produce eggs, eggs turn into chickens. Right. Every producing cause gives subsistence to things similar to itself. Okay? So dead matter cannot produce conscious matter unless the effect, right? Because we're over here in the universe and how the universe and consciousness, how they come into play in the existence of being, right? So in the atheist worldview, matter is the cause, consciousness is the effect, right? So we are beings of matter, and for us to have produced out of the universe, we must be necessarily similar to it, as we only exist in and through the universe. This is the argument from contingency based on consciousness. For consciousness to have been produced, it must be produced by something that is similar to it. This similar thing is God. Remember what I said previously about how every single theist accepts some kind of conscious being as being the responsible for the universe, whereas an atheist denies consciousness had any part of the creation of the universe? Okay, well, this is very important to understand when deciding whether or not to be an atheist or whether or not to be a theist based on purely rational, logical dialectic. So this necessary consciousness exists as the producer of all that is contingent. Right? So one of the qualities of God is that it's necessary. It is the necessary being. It is also consciousness. Okay? Consequently, if we think about it from the perspective stated in Plato's Timaeus, that the basic primordial patterns of all that is life must include intelligence, feeling, emotion, and self-reflection intrinsic to its essence of the conditions which produced it. Then this universe producing a conscious being that can feel and is intelligent is a natural occurrence of it and an expectation of such conditions. If you have these conditions a part of the cause and effect relationship, then we can recognize that if there are conscious beings in the universe, then that's a natural process due to the fact that the basic primordial patterns of all that is life include these aspects, right? Logical conclusion. Okay, So, in conclusion, unless the argument from contingency focuses on consciousness, it will fail as an argument. And most atheists know this. Vito Corleone presented the primary focus on consciousness through the ontological a priori mathematical equation and explanation. This is a metaphysics that explains the conditions needed to produce curious, thoughtful, intelligent, sometimes stupid, as well as self-reflective matter. The opposing viewpoint, atheism, denies the intrinsic properties needed to produce the conditions necessary for this conscious form of matter. So when we fully understand the philosophy behind metaphysics, instead of just going for blind faith and belief, we see that the theistic worldview is the only tenable worldview that would produce a conscious being, due to the fact that we are necessarily similar to the universe since we operate in and through the universe. Okay, so if that didn't fully explain it to you, no worries, we're only halfway through. Okay? So, although I said in conclusion, the next section is response to counter arguments, and then we'll essentially be at the end. Just to counter a few misconceptions, this is about consciousness. This does not have anything to do with organic or inorganic matter. The Miller-Urey experiment and anything like it really doesn't have any relevance to this argument and is not an actual refutation, because in actuality that experiment is in perfect agreement with my argument from contingency based on consciousness. As I just said, if we have the necessary conditions, then obviously life coming from matter would be the expectation, due to the fact that it's a part of the basic pattern and structure that is being, that is ontology. So to clarify why it's not an assumption, right? So the main thing is that the atheist wants to claim that this is an assumption, that this is not a legitimate mathematical equation, that dead matter plus dead matter can somehow equal consciousness, right? So we're going to explain how that is a assumption to claim that dead matter plus dead matter equals consciousness. Because mathematically, dead matter plus dead matter equals dead matter. Okay? So let's go over why it is, if we're going to make a decision about atheism or theism based on an intellectual and rational dialectic, why we cannot choose atheism. Okay? Cannot choose it. You can only choose option number 2 or option number 3. Dualism or pantheism. And we're not going to get into which one of the two we're going to choose, because that's another video. We're just choosing whether or not God exists. And so far through this process, we have come to the recognition that we must clarify why this is an assumption, and therefore we cannot choose option number 1 in terms of the equations presented. So if we start out by trying to prove the atheist worldview to be correct. Okay, in the first part of the essay, I started out by proving that the theistic worldview was the correct one. Okay, now let's turn our attention around and let's try and prove that the atheist one is the correct one. Okay, let's do it. Unbiased. If we start out trying to prove that the atheistic worldview is the correct choice for a foundation of metaphysics, we immediately recognize that the atheistic worldview does not set up the conditions necessary to bring consciousness into existence. How do we know this? Well, we can epistemologically verify that claim through Proclus's proposition number 28 and number 103. But we're going to go through 28, 30, and 103. In the atheistic worldview, the atheists claim that we can live in a universe devoid of consciousness and feeling outside of the biological organism. This is claiming that the cause of consciousness is in fact contradictory and dissimilar to its effect. That dead matter causes consciousness and that dead matter is dissimilar to its effect, i.e. dead matter is the cause, consciousness is the effect in the atheist worldview. However, we know a priori that by defining everything outside of a biological organism as dead matter, the atheist denies the conditions necessary to produce consciousness, because the effect, consciousness, can only be produced by something similar to its cause. We know this a priori because we are born knowing the argument from contingency, because we are born knowing that we are born. So just using the dialectic, not using anything else, we can come to the truth based on a priori knowledge. In other words, knowledge that we already have. So just to unpack that really quickly, epistemology, if you didn't know, is the verification of knowledge. In philosophy, we don't just claim to have knowledge, we also claim to have verified our knowledge. Therefore, we can have a claim to actual knowledge because we verified it. It's not just, say, a belief or faith. It's something that we've come to in terms of this dialectical process of... I'm not really going to get into the whole... There's many different forms of epistemology. But basically, epistemology is doing the verification of knowledge so that we can know that our knowledge is in fact knowledge, and there isn't some kind of incoherent cause and effect relationship a part of the equation causing it to not be real knowledge. And so we are born knowing that we are born. And so therefore we're born knowing the argument of contingency. Therefore we are born with a priori knowledge. Okay? Consequently, the atheistic worldview violates the law of non-contradiction due to the argument denying the conditions required for consciousness. When we know a priori, due to the argument from contingency, that the cause cannot produce an effect that is contradictory to the cause, as well as the situation does not result in the conditions required to produce the effect of consciousness in our specific universe. The atheistic worldview that the cause of dead matter produced the effect of consciousness is contradictory because it is a claim that a cause can produce a dissimilar effect. By the atheist's own admission, consciousness is contrary to dead matter because death is contrary to life in the atheist worldview. Accordingly, the atheist worldview claims that a cause can produce a contrary effect. Hence, the example I used above, that a cow that cannot be produced from a chicken. A cause cannot produce a dissimilar effect for the main reason it doesn't have the conditions necessary to create that effect. In this case, the chicken does not have the DNA and the womb space necessary to create a cow. Analogically, we can say that dead matter does not have the conditions of intelligence, feelings, emotions, and self-reflection needed to produce conscious matter for the same reason. Okay, really quickly, let's get into this. So, briefly, I'm going to go into what this has to do because we're almost to the end of the argument, and I just wanted to clarify for anyone who may have, it may have gone over your head what I was trying to say there. Okay, so basically, every producing cause gives subsistence to things similar to itself, right? So over here, what the atheist is saying is that the cause gave existence to an effect that is not similar, but in fact contradictory, right? Over here we have a fire, and so when we have a fire, we can look at it a couple of ways. So the first way is the match lights the fire because of the kindling, and this creates CO2. It doesn't create water, right? We're not lighting a match, getting kindling, putting it to the kindling, and getting water, right? We're getting fire, right? So there is a necessary flow of the things that are involved in this situation, right? The oxygen gets a part of the cause and effect relationship, and it's continued to be produced, right? Same thing over here. We have the chicken produce the egg turns into a chicken produce the egg, right? We have a cause and effect relationship. The cause gives subsistence to things similar to itself. Now, everything that is produced from a certain thing without a medium abides in this producing cause and proceeds from it. So this is what I was saying earlier about how we exist in and through the universe. So because we are the universe, we can't exist except through the universe, we must necessarily be similar to it because there's no medium between us and the universe. And if there were, you'd have to go through that kind of philosophy, because at that point, to me, it sounds like you're making shit up to say that we are necessarily separated from the universe by some kind of medium. And so if there is no separation between us and the universe, we must be similar to the thing that we are. A priori. Anyways, moving on to number 103. Everything that the effect contains must necessarily be found within the cause that produced it. This is kind of another way of looking at number 28, but it's looking the other way. Instead of saying that the cause that produces the effect must be similar, it's saying the other way. It's saying that the effect must necessarily be similar to the cause that produced it, right? And so we know this a priori, and it doesn't really matter what kind of diagram or what kind of conditions we bring up here. We're going to find that in every single situation, these hold true. That these propositions hold true in a way that we can epistemologically verify that dead matter plus dead matter equals dead matter. Because every producing cause gives subsistence to things similar to itself. And we know that there's nothing similar to consciousness throughout the entire universe. There's nothing similar to feeling, there's nothing similar to intelligence, and there's nothing similar to self-reflection, except for one word that brings all of those things together called consciousness. Okay? That's, of course, in the English language. So, to continue on, consequently, by reductio ad absurdum, we can demonstrate that the atheist is wrong and the only tenable worldview is a worldview in which the cause of consciousness is similar to the resulting effect. The only worldview that accepts consciousness is a theistic worldview, not an atheistic worldview and not an agnostic worldview. The crux of the argument has nothing to do with organic or inorganic matter. The crux of the argument is that the atheist violates the rules of non-contradiction due to the fact that they claim dead matter produces something contrary to it, and consciousness can be produced from something that is not similar to it. In conclusion, in just a few sentences, to wrap all of this up, the atheist's argument violates the law of non-contradiction. We can't have a contradiction in the argument. So because in the argument the atheist violates the law of non-contradiction, the argument claims a cause can produce a contrary effect, i.e. dead matter can produce emotional, conscious matter, or in other words, death creates life. The entire atheist argument can be summed up in just a few words that they claim death created life. And we know, a priori, death does not create life. So, accordingly, I stopped being an atheist. I grew up as an atheist. I will do a video on my background, but I stopped being an atheist when I was, I don't know, sometime between 21 and 23. There wasn't exactly a specific moment, but right now I'm 25, and like I said, I grew up as an atheist, and so I actually started out on this whole journey as an atheist trying to prove God doesn't exist. But this is what I found as my proof of God number 2. Again, I'm making a video on proof of God number 1. That's actually the first evidence of God that I came across, and we'll get into that. But thank you for listening. I don't really care if you convert. What I'm just concerned with is feedback on my essay. And so I wanted to mention a couple of things, and then I'm going to wrap it up with a quote from the Corpus Hermeticum, And hopefully this video isn't too long. Thank you for staying with me this whole time. Really quickly, I want to say reductio ad absurdum basically means that you can reduce the argument to be absurd, and therefore you can show that it's contradictory and wrong. And that's why we disregard the atheist argument. So this is the foundation for metaphysics, whether we're talking about metaphysics for other people, because most people don't really take the time to define being, since metaphysics is usually treated as first philosophy, since regardless of what kind of branch of philosophy you're going to be dealing with, you're going to be dealing with being. It's whether or not you sit there and discuss it, you're kind of presupposing the being, and you're kind of presupposing that you understand being, so that when you're discussing your other philosophical disciplines, you should really start with metaphysics and ontology, and this is what we're doing. And so subsequently, this will be very important in where this channel goes, because a lot of what this channel does will be based in metaphysics, and also making the claim that metaphysics should be brought into academia, because it is a legitimate part of our nature, and if we truly are spiritual beings, then we are doing something extremely detrimental to ourselves by removing this. And that doesn't, again, we'll talk about the consequences in some other video, but basically, like I said, I'm not interested in converting people. I'm just interested in explaining that there is a rational way of understanding God, and not everyone who is religious is necessarily irrational. So one thing I want to mention really quickly is that I said that there's nothing similar to consciousness, and that doesn't defeat my own argument in terms of these mathematical equations, in case you thought that that was a contradictory statement, because the monad can have consciousness and dead matter in it. This is what we're talking about in terms of what these two equations mean, and if you were, again, to go for that kind of ideology, you'd be picking dualism, equation number 2, dead matter plus consciousness equals conscious matter. So the reason that this is proof of God is because it rules out all the other options. If we look at the argument from contingency without the focus of consciousness, we see that the reason why it's not accepted is because an atheist can sit there and say that that necessary being that starts all of this contingency doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to be a conscious being. And if we do call it God, it is a dead matter, because some people accept a dead God. And so we recognize that I did prove God because I defined what I proved, right? I proved that there is a necessary being that plays a part in the rule of the universe, that we know is contingent through all of these cause and effect relationships and the conditions involved in the cause and effect relationships, right? And I proved that this necessary being is conscious, right? And not only did I prove that the necessary being is conscious, but I also proved that it's a unity. And it is the largest unity that is conscious, and it represents all of being. And if you're asking me when I proved that it's unity in the largest, just go back to proposition number 1, or if you want, I didn't necessarily prove it here, but a deep explanation would go from Pierre Grimes' commentary on Plato's Parmenides. Basically what he talks about is, if there's no such thing as a unity, you can't talk about anything. Just think about time. If there's no unity to our time-space continuum, then you couldn't have existence. And so therefore we know that all multitude participates in a certain respect with the one. Hopefully you remember me saying that earlier. So we know that God, the thing that I defined, is consciousness. It is the necessary being. It's the thing that unifies everything, and it is the largest thing. So there's nothing larger than God. Anyone who wants to sit there and say, oh, we live in a multiverse, that's great. I don't care. That doesn't change the argument. This is still the largest being that is the necessary being for whether one universe or multiple universes, whether one dimension or an infinite dimension. It doesn't really matter. This argument still stands. And it doesn't give the dissenter wiggle room. There is no room to disagree. The only another thing that someone might say is that if we go back in time, that the laws of reality are different, and that's great and all, but that doesn't change the fact that we have cause and effect relationships, and there must necessarily be this cause and effect relationship going back to include the primordial pattern of life. So no matter how far back in the creation of the universe we go, then we're still going to necessarily have to include these cause and effect relationships and the conditions that bring the cause and effect relationships into being. So essentially, therefore, God, metaphysics, should be studied as a legitimate form of academia. It shouldn't be frowned upon or seen as irrational. And so for the perfect quote, let's go with the Corpus Hermeticum. For there can be no religion more true or just than to know the things that are, and to acknowledge thanks for all things to what made them, which I shall not cease continually to do. Be pious and religious, O my children, for he that does so is the best and highest philosopher, and without philosophy it is impossible ever to attain to the height and exactness of piety and religion. He then shall learn and study the things that are, and how they are ordered and governed, and by whom and for what cause, and to what end. He will acknowledge thanks to the Creator, just as a good parent, an excellent nurse, and a faithful friend. He that gives thanks shall be pious and religious. He who is religious shall know both where the truth is and what it is, and learning that he shall be more and more religious. And this is the Divine Pymander, edited by William Wynne Westcott, co-founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. But basically, what that means is I just wanted to express that philosophy and religion coexist side by side. They balance each other, and that there can be no religion more true or just, more close to the truth or more close to justice than to know the things that are, and to acknowledge thanks for all things to what made them, which I shall not cease to do continuously. Be pious and religious. So, what is piety and religion according to this? It's just being thankful, right? Like it said in the third paragraph, we acknowledge thanks to the Creator, just as a good parent, an excellent nurse, and a faithful friend. If you've ever been thankful for someone that did something for you, being religious is literally just the same thing, just being thankful for God for providing for us. It's not very complicated, and those people who kind of get off track are those people who aren't necessarily interested in balancing both philosophy and religion, which is why I wanted to say this last quote from Hermes Trismegistus. Be pious and religious, O my children, for he that does so is the best and highest philosopher. And he who is religious shall know more about where the truth is and what it is, and learning that he shall be more and more religious. I know I said he a couple of times. Just disregard it. It's supposed to be gender neutral. It's just the translation. It's from the early 1900s, like I think before 1905. So basically, I wanted to end with that being pious and religious is the best and highest philosopher. Because philosophers just study God. Anything that is being that we're studying is just going to be God, right? So knowing this, we'll be more and more religious. And that's how I approach situations. And I just wanted to give that to you. Regardless of whether or not you convert, whether or not you become more and more religious is relevant. I just wanted feedback on my ideas, and I also wanted to give a holistic perspective that although I can't really talk about the consequences of accepting God for everyone and society, what I can talk about is that essentially it's important to balance both philosophy and religion, because philosophy is about a way of living. It's about discovering an art of living. It's not just about some intellectual activity. And so therefore, I personally practice a couple of religions. I'm a Christian. I also practice Advaita Vedanta, which is a strain of Hinduism, and I also practice Taoism. Okay, so that is the end. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. I hope you enjoyed. If you do think this is legitimate proof of God, please remember to like, comment, subscribe for more content, as well as share it to other people in case they are interested in these topics. And with that being said, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.